If you're an attorney that's been using Claude, you might have noticed this model picker at the bottom right hand of the chat bar. We got 4 different model options, and within each model, we also have an effort option. I'm going to go over the differences between these model offerings, and I'm also going to talk about what thinking means in the context of large language models, and give my overall recommendations on which ones you should use day to day. New models and options get released all the time, and I'm recording this video in July 2026. So if you're watching this in the future, some of these models might not exist, but I'm going to explain this in a way that should be useful regardless of what the latest and greatest model is when you happen to be watching this video. Now to start, we're just going to go through the different model options. We've got Fable 5, Opus 4.8, Sonnet 5, and Haiku 4.5. These are actually ordered in terms of general intelligence. So Fable is the smartest, and that's why Anthropic is telling us that's for your toughest challenges. Opus 4.8 comes in second, followed by Sonnet 5 and Haiku 4.5. When we say smartest, what that means is generally, if you ask a question or give a task to Fable 5, the chances that it does what you want are generally going to be higher than for Haiku 4.5. Likewise, Sonnet 5 is going to have a higher chance of doing what you want than Haiku 4.5, and Opus 4.8 higher than Sonnet 5. So you might be wondering, if Fable 5 is the best, why would I ever not use it? Well, the main thing comes down to cost and speed. As you might know, large language models require GPUs to run. Generally speaking, when models are smarter, that means they're bigger. That is, their artificial brains have a lot more neurons to work with. And of course, I'm speaking at a high level here, but in general, what that means is in order to run Fable 5, that's going to require more GPUs than it's going to take to run Haiku 4.5. And of course, Anthropic needs to make money. And so if you want to use Fable 5, you have to use up more of their GPUs to actually get a response. And not only that, but the model being bigger actually makes it slower to output tokens and text. So you as the user have to pay for that. And basically what that means is the larger the model, the slower it's going to be and the more expensive it's going to be on your end. And importantly, your usage limits are going to get used up a lot faster if you're using Fable 5 for everything than if you stick with Claude Haiku 4.5. Now, in terms of what you should use as your daily driver, I would recommend avoiding Haiku 4.5 at all costs. Sonnet 5 I would also avoid unless you're really, really concerned about usage limits. And I would generally just use Opus 4.8 for everything. You can try out Fable 5 if you want to see the latest and greatest intelligence, but I honestly find that Opus 4.8 is really, really good, and it hits that sweet spot of usability and speed without really eating into your limits way too fast. There's also more models over here. We can see Opus 4.7, Opus 4.6, and Sonnet 4.6. These are older versions of the Opus and Sonnet models that Anthropic still supports. Unless you have a personal attachment to one of these old models, I just wouldn't use them. You're going to probably get the best results with the latest and greatest. Now, it's hard to give concrete recommendations of when a task will require Fable 5 or when even Sonnet would be good enough. It takes a bit of playing around, and that's totally fine. Off the top of my head, if I had to think of a task that would be totally fine on even something like Haiku, I would imagine copying and pasting the text of an opinion into Claude and asking it what the holding was, or asking if it was relevant to a particular issue that you're researching. That's something that's relatively easy to do, and probably Haiku would be able to do it. As you move up the ladder, and again, thinking in the context of legal research, if you're asking Claude to cross-reference a bunch of different documents, if you're asking it to go onto the internet and make sure that it looks at a lot of different primary sources, that's where you're going to benefit from higher intelligence, because Claude's going to be able to figure out, or at least have a higher chance of figuring out, if it found all the primary sources and overall just do a better job of interpreting everything as there's more and more information that it has to read. Now, once you've selected a model, you also have to select a thinking level, and I'm just going to run this prompt so I can show you what it means when a model is actually thinking. I believe this is Opus 4.8 with high thinking enabled, and you can see here that we're thinking, and its thought process isn't always public, but basically the model is going to talk to itself and reason about the user's request. So it's going to say, oh, well, the user's asking about pricing here. Maybe I should go search the web. Maybe I should look for Claude's actual terms of service and cross-reference those. You don't really need to understand why this helps, but just know that the more that the model talks to itself, in general, the better it's able to reason about the user's request. And just for some context, I was running a prompt here asking if Claude Pro or Claude Team is better for a solo lawyer, and looking at it through the lens of ethics. So for this effort tab, low thinking means the model is only going to be allowed to talk to itself for a little bit or not at all. Medium, it's going to use a little more. High, even more still. Extra, and then max is going to basically allow it to talk to itself for minutes and minutes on end. Anthropic's going to default you to high in most cases. I personally like it a little bit lower because I'm pretty impatient and I like to be hands on the keyboard and more interactive with the models rather than letting them go for 10 minutes and coming back to see what they did. I would say in general, the lower the thinking level you provide, the more steering you're going to have to do, and the more general instructions you're going to actually need to provide in the prompt to get good results. But it's going to depend a lot on the task that you're doing. And in many cases, even with low thinking, you don't need to actually steer the model that much to get good results. Of course, a benefit of using lower thinking is that it's going to use less tokens, it's going to be faster, and your usage is not going to get eaten up as quickly. But if you got a very complicated request, it might be worth it to bump the thinking to high or extra. I'd honestly recommend just starting at medium, and usually leaving it there is going to be totally fine. Just to show you here, this is that same prompt run with low thinking, and as you can see here, this was run at 9:58 a.m. in my local time. It finished also at 9:58 a.m., so it was under 60 seconds. And the high thinking version was started at 9:58 a.m., and if we go down here to the actual result, it was printed again at 9:58 a.m. So in this case, high versus low thinking didn't affect the latency too much. But if we go over into Claude Code, which gives us a little bit more detail, we can see here that when I asked here in Opus 4.8 low, that was 21 minutes ago, and then it also finished 21 minutes ago. So again, a little bit under 1 minute. But when I go to the chat where I was using max, we can see here that that was 21 minutes ago when I sent the message, and the response is 19 minutes ago. So it was a lot longer, in this case, several minutes longer. And another thing we can see if we're using code is this wheel on the bottom right, which is going to tell us about our usage. And I'll go over what this means. The context window is the usage in the current chat. So as you send more and more messages, this bar is going to increase. And eventually, if it reaches a certain point, Claude is either going to compact your conversation, or it's eventually going to crash and not allow you to send any more messages. We can see here that we've used about 4% of our space here. And again, this is on the max thinking. If we go back over to the chat where I was on low, we're actually at 3%. So it's an extra percent more just for that single message. And you can see here that if you're using max or high thinking, you're going to run out of space in your chats a lot quicker. So as you send more messages, not only is your context window going to increase, it is also going to eat into your 5-hour limit, and it's also going to eat into your weekly limit a lot faster. And because Fable is so big and requires so many GPUs, there's actually a separate limit on Fable, at least again, as of recording this in July 2026. Now we're back in Cowork, and you can see here that I do not have that little circle that allows me to see the context usage and my plan usage. I do hope Anthropic adds this to the UI. I think it is always good to be thinking about what is your current context usage and where are you in terms of your limits. So to summarize, if you're not really sure which one to use, just go with Opus 4.8 on medium. I would avoid Claude Haiku under almost all circumstances, and I would also try to avoid Sonnet 5 unless you're really close to eating into your full usage limits for the week. Obviously, you can play around with Fable. It is a lot smarter, but for a lot of tasks that you're doing, it's probably unnecessary, and it is going to eat into your limits very, very quickly. I will also point out that other AI providers like OpenAI have very similar concepts where the bigger models are going to cost you more, they're going to use more tokens, and there's also a thinking parameter where the higher you start to think, the more tokens you're going to use, but in general, you get slightly better accuracy. I personally like to go on the lower side for thinking, but again, I'm pretty comfortable prompting and telling the model precisely what I want, and I'm also just impatient. It's something you'll have to play around with, but hopefully this helps clear things up just a little bit.